The Everything PT podcast is sponsored by VALD Performance. VALD is the creator of the airbands for blood flow restriction therapy. If you are looking to stay up to date with today's post-surgical modalities and adding BFR to your clinic, please visit valdperformance.com.
Hey, all you rehab specialists out there. Do you have an isokinetic dynamometer just sitting around your clinic not being used? Little known fact, isokinetic machines that aren't used regularly are at higher risk for bouts of sadness. Help your machine out and take CSMI's newest CEU course, Isokinetics 101 online, created by me, Daniel Bodkin, and learn how to use all the exercise and testing applications available on your machine. With new and exciting rehab techniques in your toolbox, your sad isokinetic machine can become an active member of the rehab team again and regain its happiness. Isokinetics 101 online by CSMI has been approved for 8 credit hours for athletic trainers, physical therapists, and physical therapy assistants. Contact your state board for details on specific requirements. This course is available at humacnorm.com/courses/isokinetics-101.
Hello, and welcome to the Everything PT podcast with Matt Taylor and Daniel Bodkin. Please do not consider anything you hear to be medical advice, just a couple of guys ranting about everything PT. Enjoy the show. Hello, and welcome again to the Everything PT podcast. This is episode 14, and we have a special guest, Anthony Sinacore, today. Before we get to Anthony, Daniel, how you doing, buddy?
I'm good. Just,
Good.
Living the dream.
Yes.
14 episodes, man. I mean, we've honestly gone about 6 episodes farther than I thought we would. So,
really, I was thinking we would go.
I'm just having fun with you.
Well, good, man. It's good to see you. I know Obi-Wan Kenobi came out, and you've probably been busy, locked yourself in your room and watching.
No, the wife had herself a little girls' weekend, so I put the kids to bed. I threatened them with the fear of of rage that if they came downstairs and bothered me, I was gonna bring upon them. They didn't.
The lightsaber.
Watch both episodes, and if really, if anybody's gonna watch it by this time, they would have watched it. But I recommend, if you have any little bit of inkling towards it, it's a good story so far.
Awesome, dude. I'm gonna watch it hopefully once I get through Stranger Things. I'm gonna get to watching it. But we got a very special guest today, and I'm pretty excited. So this is Anthony Sinacore with VALD, and Anthony, a little bit about you. I've done a little bit of homework, done a lot of research in dynamometry. Orthopedic resident at Delaware, have done some travel, PT, have an athletic training background, and also the orthopedic clinical specialist credential as well. So welcome, man, and we're glad that you can make it with us today.
Yeah, guys, thanks for having me. I'll just say no spoiler alerts right now because I just started Stranger Things last night, and I had to choose between Obi-Wan Kenobi versus Stranger Things.
Okay,
so, Yeah, if we could keep the spoilers to a minimum, but I'm excited to see where that thing goes, let alone this podcast.
We're glad that you're here, dude. So I know I got Stranger Things and Daniel's got Obi-Wan. So
I could have started Stranger Things, but I'm a big I play the Oculus VR system. So like I said, the wife was out of town, so I was like, I want to go down and run around my basement and shoot things. So I did that. Around. Yeah, so I'm a big VR nerd too.
Yes. Cats away, the mice will play, right?
Exactly.
All right. Anthony, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself and how you got to be working with VALD?
Hey guys, thanks for having me on. You kind of summarized it pretty clearly, but initially, so I'm originally from St. Louis, Missouri, grew up in Missouri, went to Indiana University for athletic training, got my bachelor's in athletic training, and somewhere in the middle of my undergraduate, I realized that, I wanted something a little bit closer niche towards, some taking away some of the bads of maybe athletic training, some of those, work-life balance issues, and then trying to find out what that right thing was. And it turned out, physical therapy was a close second second niche. So I then worked for a year as an athletic trainer while finishing up my prerequisites. And then I went to the University of Pittsburgh for physical therapy school after that 1 year of being an AT. And 3 years later, graduated, was able to hold over that hood and then be able to just find out what was next. And so my wife at the time, she was also finishing up physical therapy school a year below me. So I went into travel physical therapy. And so did that for 8 months down in Texas. Did a little bit of home health, a little bit of skilled nursing, really just things that I felt like I needed to get a little bit of experience in before I then went to the University of Delaware for my orthopedic residency. And then since then, I've kind of just been bouncing around, or the two of us have been bouncing around. We did travel physical therapy for a while. I stayed in private practice for a little bit of time. And then I found kind of a nice little niche of a sports performance place that also had physical therapy as a cash pay service. And that's where I really found a little bit more of my passion. And more or less, we'll get into more of the VALD story here in a second, but push came to shove and I ended up actually stepping away from clinical practice about 8-9 months ago. And I've been with VALD ever since.
That's awesome.
Hey, go Hoosiers, man. I grew up in
go
Indiana.
Hoosiers.
I mean, I grew up in Fort Wayne, Indiana, and I mean, Indianapolis is cool, but I never moved back to Indiana after I left. Did you ever get to make it to St. Elmo Steakhouse in Indianapolis?
Down in Peyton Manning Steakhouse, you got to at least.
Man, I mean, don't get me wrong, their steaks are fantastic, but you really go there for the cocktail sauce, which I mean, you can now order online through Amazon, but I think it hits a little bit harder when you get it there in person.
Yeah, you got to go with an empty stomach and be ready for all of those little flavor profiles to come out at you.
So if anybody doesn't know about this, steak sauce or cocktail sauce is really high in horseradish, right? Nobody told me this. We would go there for the NFL Combine, and we'd always go out to dinner. And I was the new guy, and they said, "Oh, you got to get the cocktail sauce." I'm like, all right, so I go ahead and take it, and like it literally lights your sinuses on fire. Very different than eating something spicy. And I thought I was having some kind of a shellfish reaction. I thought I was like having like an instant anaphylactic shock or something. But it hits you hard for like 5 seconds, then just goes away. It's the weirdest thing.
It's like getting that extra bit of wasabi when you're having sushi.
No, thank you, sir.
Yeah,
it just
wasabi.
kicks your ass.
All right. Back to the conversation today. So Matt, tell us about your researching of Anthony. What did you find?
Yeah. So I was reading through, Anthony, a little bit of your research, trying to familiarize myself with things. And I was like, dang, this dude's been doing research since 1994. And I was doing some quick math and I was like, he would have been about, 3 or 4 years old at that point. And then I realized, is that your father that was doing that? A relative, right?
Yeah, so there's a big distinction now. You got to have that distinction of what are those first couple initials are. Is it Sinacore JA or Sinacore DR? And if you see the DR, that's most certainly my dad. He's been a physical therapist, academician, and researcher for probably 35 years now, mostly all through the University of or Washington University in St. Louis. Mm-hmm. And so that's obviously that's why I grew up there. And so since then, he actually just left WashU about 2-3 years ago. Now he's at High Point University down in High Point, North Carolina, heading up one of their labs out there. So you'll definitely see his name way more in the literature than you'll ever see mine. That's for sure.
So you kind of grew up in the PT world, or being exposed to PT.
It's really funny because when I went into athletic training school, it was almost like that little bit of rebellion where it's like, I don't want to do just what my dad does. Right. And so I'm going to do something different. I'm going to go into athletic training, sports medicine. And, it didn't take long before I was like, really thinking, well, I can see a little bit of the trajectory of how athletic trainers, as how they're treated and kind of just like almost like a second tier professional. And it's kind of crazy because they do so much of the legwork, so much of the important side of just preparation and being ready for, that injury whenever that fateful time comes for that athlete. And, when it came to not having a lot of the the sense of where that work-life balance would go is like, if, you know, a coach is pissed off or an athletic director is pissed off, and, you know, it kind of makes your job a lot harder. You got to show up early mornings and not get maybe the pay we wanted. So very quickly I was thinking, hey, well, what solves this problem? And also, you know, one of the things that I just mentally and personally didn't necessarily like, and I didn't really think of this until I was halfway in, was, you know, someone's worst day is my best day. Like when I get to actually be there for them, it's like they're going through the worst and I'm just kind of waiting for something bad, so to speak, to happen. But I really enjoyed the rehab side. I enjoyed the side of like, they've already had that bad moment, and now let's get them back to enjoy life again, enjoy their sport. And sure enough, I mean, physical therapy kind of like checked all those boxes. A little bit better pay, you know, a lot more calmer hours, or at least anticipated hours, as well as being able to see some of those, you know, highlight reels of that athlete or that patient, you know, fulfilling their dream and becoming more functional. And so sure enough, it just brought me right back to that conversation with Dad saying, hey, I think I'm thinking about this PT thing. What do you think? And that's honestly, it wasn't until I got into Pittsburgh to where it really did feel more familial, you know? So like there's people in his circle that he's been around for decades, right? And like if I threw a name like Tony DeLito, where you think of like low back pain clinical practice guidelines, like that was his physical therapy school roommate. And so like I hear these last names my whole life, and I didn't necessarily like, I just thought it's like my dad's friends. Like, you know, I've got friends too. But then when you get into PT school and then you start going through the grind and you start reading the literature and you start, you know, taking the tests and you start realizing, you know, all this is fundamentally coming from that generation, my dad's generation of, you know, academicians, researchers, and just the people above them, the mentors that they really stood on. And so it became a lot cooler, you know, right around that time when I just started realizing, like, holy crap, like these are some big wigs and you know them all.
Looking for a way to improve sport-specific training with your athletes? Then you have to check out BlazePods. BlazePods is a neurocognitive reaction training intervention that can be incorporated into your sessions for patients throughout the treatment spectrum. Visit blazepod.com, enter code EVERYTHINGPT at checkout, and save 15% off your order today. This podcast is sponsored by CSMI, the maker of the HUMAC Norm isokinetic system. Purchase a new or refurbished machine, or you can even upgrade an existing system to bring it up to date with all the latest testing and training applications. Please visit csmisolutions.com to view all of their available products, including the HUMAC Norm isokinetic system, the HUMAC Balance portable computerized balance system, and Sportswear Online. CSMI. Better data leads to better results.
Why don't we go into a little bit about what VALD has? Let's start with the airguns.
Let's go with VALD. Yeah. So
let's go with VALD.
Anyone who hasn't heard of VALD before, it's V as in Victor. So people always think VALD, like what's going on there? So VALD is actually a Nordic term for strength. So it's always kind of starting from the get-go. And the company was created by two very close friends. And then their third best friend actually was employee number one. The three best friends created this initial system called the NordBord. And it looks at, and we'll talk on the NordBord as well, but the NordBord is basically a very clean way of assessing eccentric hamstring strength. You put a load cell, that you know the Nordic hamstring curl, you put a load cell instead of someone holding onto the ankles, put a load cell right there that's capturing how much strength or how much load input they're going through on each left and right side. And as you could probably imagine, soccer clubs and physio clinics, performance clinics all across the globe really ate it up and really understood the significance of something that an objective test very quickly done can provide. And so that's where VALD was born. It started with the NordBord. Now we have 8 different products. Some of them a little bit more maybe commercialized than others, but they all have their own specific place within sport, performance, healthcare, and tactical settings.
Yeah, I mean, you mentioned the NordBord. It's not just enough to measure as they're doing it, but I love it. You get real-time feedback to right to a device. So as you're doing the exercise, the athlete can see, am I engaging both sides? And they can use that as a way to bring it up. And that, I think that's really cool. Having, me being an isokinetics guy, getting that visual feedback makes a huge difference.
Yeah, and as you know, when you're dealing with isokinetic testing, not alone, let alone training is kind of like a secondary beast, which really should be more in the primary spotlight. But when it comes to testing, it's all about getting max output from that person, right? Most athletes, they're going to immediately kind of get it, but you have to really encourage them to get going and get moving. And they kind of know, if they know what you want out of it, they're going to find a way to cheat, right? They're going to find a way just to get whatever they need. But if you can find some feedback or some way to create a visual output for them, what they're going to do then is they're going to see, hey, that's not them just yelling at me. That's actually what I'm putting out. And I know I can put out a little bit better. So any biofeedback, anything that they can use as a visual aid is always going to be a higher priority for getting that max output. And I think that's one of the nice things that all of VALD's products do, that in some form.
Well, let's talk some more about some of your strength tests devices.
Yep.
Right. Let's talk a few about more of those, and then we'll move into the air bands.
Sounds great. Yeah. So we have three main strength testing systems. We've already talked on the NordBord. So really, when it comes down to it, it's a one-trick pony, but it does that one trick exceptionally well. You're not going to be able to look at eccentric and concentric as well as isometric strength testing that reliably in any other system across probably the globe. There isn't any one competitor that can do the Nordic the same way that we can. And so the NordBord's great for that side. The ForceFrame, now, as we start diving into handheld dynamometry versus isometric dynamometry in general, whether you're testing it on the CSMI or other larger devices, is that you have to make sure that reliability or the protocol is consistent the entire time to have the highest amount of reliability. And so what the ForceFrame is it's basically an H-frame system that has two paddles, an inner and outer paddle on the left and the right side. And so what you could do is, then the way that it's set up, and we can put some links on for the show notes, but the way that it's set up is it allows you to rotate the bar at 5-degree increments all the way from 0 to 180, theoretically 360, but 0 to 180, as well as raise the entire crossbar from the lowest all the way to the highest. And what that allows you for, between those two things, it allows you to be able to do just about any muscle group in most of the standardized protocols, whether that's sitting, prone, hook lying, supine. You can really test very quickly, but also reliably. And then, of course, a very common theme when it comes to all of our systems is you get this immediate left and right. So you're getting an asymmetry almost instantaneously. So if you wanted to test hip AB adduction at 60 degrees hip flexion and then move right over to prone knee flexion and get more of that hamstring or biased hip extensor strength, then we could easily do that, and then flip them over one more time to supine and being able to do shoulder ER, IR. And so very quickly you're getting 4 or 5 of these immediate metrics or immediate tests done, where you're getting metrics from max force, peak force, average forces, asymmetry forces, impulse, rate of force development. It becomes very quick. And so now you can, the key of the ForceFrame is now being able to go from one testing day and then obviously testing them much later. So are we testing a week later, a day later, a month, 3 months, however it might be. And the way that the system is set up is that however you set that patient up before, whether it was 15 degrees of the crossbar rotation at a bar height of 18, then the next time that person gets tested, it'll tell you exactly to set it up that same way. So no matter who in the clinic is testing, they're going to be able to reliably do the same thing. So you know that your data is truly apples to apples comparison.
That's a lot. That's a lot. So you don't mean that like 4 or 4+ out of 5 is just as good, Anthony?
Oh, it all depends on who's doing that 4+, right? Like if I could be in everybody's, clinic and being able to do that, then my 4+ is pretty reliable. But as soon as we get into what is a 5- or some of these things where people are just trying to make things up to be able to say that there still is a difference, but they're getting better, right? Like where's that ceiling effect?
Not only that, but I've heard that even within like doing a quad manual muscle test, if they're 5 out of 5, they can get to that point at only 40% of their maximum volitional contraction. That might not be an accurate number, but that's what I always heard while I was in schools. That even with a 5 out of 5, this can mask a really big strength deficit that they have.
Absolutely.
Especially if someone has 200 pounds of quad force, which inevitably athletes do once they get later on in the return sport process too. So
absolutely. And my wife is, she's 105 pounds, and she's tested knee extension strength before and said, that's a good 5 to me. And I might test it and I might be pretty darn close, but call it a 4+. And now it's just a matter of, is it just because we have two different strength capacities within ourselves? Was it our own setup and how I was maybe a little bit more in a staggered stance and she was just on top of them because she knows she's just going to get raised off the floor? And so that's where, again, it really comes down to your test and retest reliability is one thing, your intra-test, same side reliability. But if we start talking about asymmetries and then asymmetries over time, we want to be able to provide the best data for that person at the right time to be able to progress, regress, or keep them under the status quo of where they're going.
Daniel, have you heard about the force plate technology that ball? Have you seen any?
I looked at videos online.
Very cool. Very cool stuff.
I've not used it. I don't know what all other than, again, I've seen some of the things that you can measure, but there's so many applications that I'm not aware of that you can use it with.
Yeah, so I went in at CSM and I just went in to get information from VALD, met Anthony, and ended up going with BFR cuffs. And the guy could sell ice to an Eskimo too. So no, but the force plate technology, Anthony, can you speak to that? Really, really cool stuff. I was this close away from walking out with some.
Yeah, absolutely. So, and not necessarily to drive things back. But what I forgot to mention was our third strength testing system, which was the DynaMo. And we're actually really pumped about this because it only launched about 3 weeks ago. And it's basically taking your ForceFrame and dwindling it down into a portable handheld device. So as you talk about your other handheld dynamometers that are out there, your Lafayette's, your Microfets, some of the most common, Tyndek and some of these strain gauges are becoming a lot more common as well, is what the DynaMo does exceptionally well is it takes out all of the pain points that a therapist is going to have, meaning similar to all the other systems, it's all going to be immediately put into and set to that profile. So if you can set, let's say, Matt, you want to test your shoulder external and internal rotation, left versus right side. As you're going through the flow of it, it's just going to sync that all directly to your profile. So then you'll have a report immediately generated with your asymmetries, with your peak forces. So it takes all of the goods of what the NordBord, the ForceFrame, they're already doing. And now it offers compression and tension-based loading. So whether you want to do a compression more, let's say hip AB, AD, where you're on top of them while they're side lying, or going tension-based and doing your ER, IR, knee extension as you typically would with those Tyndek units. Now it offers the ability to do both, which we're obviously super pumped about because up until that point, no system had really done that. So let's go into force plates now. The nice part about just force plates in general is that we're talking about them. Now physical therapists, athletic trainers, alike, we're starting to be able to implement some of this technology right in the clinic rather than having to say, okay, we're creating an affiliation with a lab, or we know this researcher who's going to be able to do some really cool stuff with 3D capture, motion capture. And so now we're able to put these force plates in the clinic extremely portable. And that's probably one of the biggest things I always like to highlight is that we're actually having this conversation of where force plates can be able to be a part of that decision-making process, whether it's coming from a 80-year-old grandmother who wants to be able to bend down and pick up her laundry or pick up her grandkids who are moving and squirming, or being able to get that, soccer player who's had 2 different revision surgeries on that same knee and is just trying to avoid that painstaking problem of going back and fearing injury. And so what the ForceDecks, so we have 3 different sizes of ForceDecks, but generally speaking, the only differences of those ForceDecks are the surface area of the plate themselves. They go from very small to only a couple of feet in length and width, to where you can actually, with 10 pounds each, you could just kind of pick them up and move them from plinth to plinth, all the way to maybe our more kind of research grade, our maxes, which are more embedded in the floor. They're 45 pounds each. They have slightly more force capacity themselves, but generally speaking, they're all the same. And so again, you get left and right. So we have 2 different force plates to be able to assess how much pressure, ground reaction force you're putting into the ground. Now, it should be noted that these are just uniaxial plates. So you're looking at the y-axis. So it's not a trivector where you're getting X, Y, Z. But all things considered, when it comes to being a physical therapist in a sport and orthopedic clinic, you're really just looking at the specificity of certain movements, whether that's a squat, whether that's a vertical jump or a landing, and looking at time to absorption or time to stabilization. And then when you start looking into, let's say, broad jumps or things where you're going in another direction, you take it with a grain of salt, knowing that that's still very valid data from the y-axis, but you're not getting a true representation of what everything's doing.
Really, what I was impressed with at CSM when I saw it was the weight bearing application for the squat. Really cool. Early on in the rehab process, the squat is a go-to for a lot of rehab professionals. That was cool. Return to jumping, really cool. It will tell you what kind of jump you're actually doing. With it doesn't even know, but based on your reading, it will tell you and then record it. And so it'll give you, comparisons from right to left, involved, not involved. Very, very cool stuff. So
yeah, and so like Daniel, you were kind of talking a little bit about before of just like, being able to have that feedback. And so the force trace curve, kind of what you were alluding to, Matt, there was the software picks up based off of the force tracing, basically force over time, what type of movement that was. So if it's a squat, you're obviously going to see more of an eccentric period or negative velocity going towards the ground. And then you're going to have a concentric period. So it kind of picks up those sine waves to know that, hey, that's more of a squat, versus having a counter movement jump and going from an eccentric to a concentric, having a flight phase and then a landing phase. So each of these different movements, drop jumps, drop landings, counter movement jumps, squat jumps versus squats in general, they're all going to have generally a specific signature that the force trace is going to be able to, or the software is going to know that the force trace picks it up as. But what you can also do is you can also set it to just like metric mode, right? Where it's only creating visual display of the metrics themselves. And so if you wanted to look at, let's say, someone's ability to do a loaded squat, you feel like their squats are great, you want to load them up, put let's say a kettlebell in the front rack position to be more of like a goblet squat. And as you just go into your squats down and up, it's going to tell you how much asymmetry left versus right, how much peak power were you putting through the ground concentrically versus eccentrically. If you start adding in a flight time, obviously it does jump height exceptionally well. So you're going to get this immediate feedback where then you can start using that to create your external versus internal cues. As we know, external cues has a lot better output, or getting a lot better from the person in front of you when you're using those cues. So now you can say, drive to the sky as high as you can, and you're going to see immediately how well that translates to the metric side.
Yeah, I'm excited about the noticing asymmetries, because we see it all the time when somebody first, we'll just use a total knee. Oh, actually, we'll use an ACL so we can go higher level. When they first start mini squat, they're going to be asymmetric in their loading. And then when you take them to the next higher level, now you're doing full squats where that it might return. But I've really noticed it when you put them under a load, that now they're loaded, that squat pattern has been beautiful with just body weight. Put a load on it, all of a sudden they start to make those compensations again. And so them being able to visually see it right there is huge. Not only that, but with your like doing a drop jump or any of your plyometric activity, it's so easy to compensate. And so this takes that compensation, or that ability for them to compensate kind of away.
Yeah. And I mean, let's take that one step further. When we have our standard protocols right now, if we go back to that ACL patient, what therapists do really well is that they create decisions within set boxes of themselves. So if you actually look at a protocol, it'll say phase 1, criteria to progress, milestones to hit. And so you're already going to get a good sense of what things that person needs to do in order to move on to the next stage. But within those boxes, within phase 1, we give ourselves a lot of wiggle room to say, okay, well, how about this and not this? And what exercises am I going to need to get the max output for those milestones 3, 4, 5 weeks down the line? But what the ForceDecks now allow you to do is it allows you to be a little bit more specific with that exercise prescription. If you go from mini squats to full squats, for the most part, any PT is going to say, great, once you hit a full squat, we're going to start loading you. And then that loading really becomes based off of RPE and pain. And so you're going to say, hey, I have a pretty good sense of because putting a foam pad or a tennis ball under their leg, that I'm leaning them into the other direction, that I'm really cueing them to be a little bit more specific on their operative side. But the nice part about these ForceDecks is it gives you every step of the way that same amount of data. So if you know that they go from a mini squat, 0% asymmetry, full squat, 0% asymmetry, loaded squat, let's say 10% of their body weight, 3% asymmetry, and you start saying, well, that's still pretty good. I think that I'm okay with that. But then you just go from 10 to 15% body weight, and that 15% brings them to 8, 9, 10% asymmetry. Now that's where you can create, you still get your boundaries to be able to create these decisions. Am I okay with 10, 11, 12% asymmetry? Or should I back them down to about 10% and just get really good at that before I start loading them up? And so each step of the way it almost becomes that your milestones that you're trying to hit at the end of each phase of your protocol isn't even a question at that point, because by the time that they have already tested, they've earned it, because now they already know what they're trying to do, whether it's a squat, whether it's a landing, whether it's being able to initiate jumping. And then obviously when we really start talking about return to play, are we getting the output from that person that we want from a strength level, from an asymmetry level, and an endurance level?
That's awesome, man. And I'm excited about the future with force plate technology. Hopefully they'll be found just regularly, in PT clinics. But I sat in on a chat from the guys from University of Delaware on BFR, and I looked closely in one of the videos, and it was you. You were in the video, the guy they were doing the picking on with the BFR. But real briefly, can you kind of summarize BFR, why it's a good thing, and maybe on its use in the future, if you don't mind? I know you've done some research with it.
Yeah, of course. So blood flow restriction, as we start talking about modalities to assist in recovery and rehabilitation, as well as just overall muscle building. So blood flow restriction had been highly utilized much earlier than the rehab setting and more in the tactical space. And Johnny Owens down at the Center of the Intrepid did a really good job of kind of bringing this more into the rehabilitation masses. But in summary, basically what it's doing is it's allowing for occlusion of your arterial pressure around the arteries of a given limb. So that's either going to be at the proximal site of your proximal femur or towards your proximal humerus. But you, generally speaking, you're not going to do any occlusion below the most proximal portion of that extremity. And then it's going to calculate how much resting or occlusion is needed from a resting state or throughout an entire exercise program, depending on which system you're using, to be able to determine how much guided feedback or how much blood flow is going to be able to return to the system versus stay in that given extremity. And because of that, you're basically creating a tourniquet type effect around that distal limb to be able to enhance the amount of oxygenated blood flow and oxygen or deprivation within the muscle. And so through that, studies have found that it can actually help increase hypertrophic gains, or being able to create the effects of weightlifting without having to lift a significant amount of weight compared to, like, say, a 1, 3, or 5 rep max.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we need our patients to get stronger. The only way to get hypertrophy without this is to go 60 to 80% of your 1 rep maximum. All right. People with injuries can't do that. So with BFR, the thing is that you can load them as low as 20 to 30% of their 1 rep max and still get those same effects as lifting 60 to 80.
It's amazing. And so I think this is the one thing that as for those that keep up with the literature and keep up trying to, debunk certain things, is cupping good for us? Is, gua sha or Graston, is that really good for your patients? Is blood flow restriction good for your patients? And what we're finding is that the literature keeps coming back in support, saying that sure enough, it is within reason, within, good supervised protocols, it is going to give you the effects for strength gains that you would otherwise not be able to see by loading low level. And so I always like this summary of one of the pieces of research basically said, if you can lift 1 rep max and you can lift super heavy and test that way and be able to consistently train in that kind of level, then do that first, because those are going to be the highest amount of gains. But if you can't, and you brought up a great point, Daniel, it's a mostly rehab setting, post-injury or coming back because of pain or limited tissue, biological healing, whatever that might be from a physiological standpoint, if you can't do that, or generally speaking, some athletes and some patients, they have no practice, no history to be able to go lift heavy, even if they physiologically could. They're just putting themselves at a higher risk of injury. So for any other state, as you're building and as you're trying to create volume in your training program, blood flow restriction seems to be one of the best things you can do comparatively to lifting at a low level of volume.
No doubt. And we see some patients here in those weeks 0 to 12, it seems to be kind of a sweet spot. Wow, they still kind of have an angry leg, so to speak, and dealing with some effusion, or it seems to be a nice place for something like BFR too.
Well,
yeah, and that's where
you have all those passive protocols you can do. I mean, you can even have them on the bike or even walking with cups.
Yeah, biking is great. Yeah, we've done it. Some people got roasted on the bike for sure.
I mean, you do a search online, you're going to see everybody doing, squats, or, push-ups, but really a big part of it is going to be what you're already doing in rehab. A straight leg raise, a bridge, or exercises that you're already performing, or even before that, just doing, isometrics under that ischemic load.
Absolutely. It's all about being able to get comfortable in that kind of pressure sense. Some people don't feel like it feels good, right? It's like it's a tourniquet on you. And so as you're lifting weights on it, what I've really kind of found in my clinical practices is you just have to start everybody light. Start them small. If 50% versus 80% occlusion is what you're after, maybe on that first couple of times, you're not going to go for gold and get all these, hypertrophic gains in the first 2-3 weeks. But if you notice the person in front of you is a little bit more intimidated or a little scared, start early, start low, and then just start working your way up, because then when it comes to the bottom of it, you can now get a really good guided squat with 80% occlusion on that lower extremity. And now you're getting everything you were looking for 2 weeks prior.
Tell me one thing about what makes air bands different than every other product out there.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up, because I was just about to push into that, is where air bands kind of has now found its little niche in the market. So, there's a lot of different brands out there, and we could go on and on about, what is the pros and cons of each of those. But what air bands did really well, and why I think, VALD has kind of started to go into more of the blood flow restriction on the rehab side, is because it solved the need of having to worry about consistent calibration. And so if generally speaking, that the Delphi units that are plugged in, they have a large cord that goes along with them, and being able to stay with an IV pole and being able to walk over, it's just inhibitive when it comes to doing squats on a squat rack and then moving over and doing cable pulls. And so you become a lot more limited into what exercise prescription and programming you can do. That's not to say that you can't figure it out. It just takes a little bit longer to do. Air bands is all completely done via Bluetooth, and their calibration is done through the app. So theoretically, you could, even if you're comfortable with that person doing it on themselves and they've done it before and they've gone through their pre-screening checklist and questionnaire, then you can have them download the app. They can just go ahead and put them on. You can go through the calibration with them, and then they're off. And whether it's on their app where they can easily, obviously, you can always deflate it immediately on the cuffs themselves, but then they can go through and they can adjust that inflation or deflation if it's too much or too low, or if you're trying to, just take a break in between the sets. And so everything is really easily done on the app. And so you don't have to worry about, let's say, other wireless cuffs, which may not be, wired in or have the tubing through it. They also generally have to be pumped. And so now you're going through and you're pumping it up specifically to a dial amount of occlusion, and then you're just releasing and moving over. Whereas these can obviously be calibrated all through the app.
Or if you're like me and you can't find the pump.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, we were using it in the eval room. So you're not connected to that pump, or it's so easy that they can do it right then and there, and you don't need that. That's huge.
Also, something I wanted to throw in there, just from a guy that's done the cost analysis, air bands about 1/5 of the price for the other competitors out there. No need to name any names, but you recommended a really great online course that we did. We got the air bands, and within 2 weeks from the thought of having it, bam, it's in clinical practice, and we feel really good about using it too. So really just more reasons to go for air bands with VALD.
And I think one thing you touch on is when I kind of recommended that course to you, it's, these aren't always necessarily our courses or our webinars. We're trying to find the right amount of information for the right people. And one of our main kind of mantras at VALD is finding the right piece of equipment, doing it at the right time on the right person. And so what we really want to make sure, and what I think that I just love about VALD as a company in general, is the fact that we are just made here to help other clinicians excel. And so one of the biggest things when it comes to all of our agreements is you get unlimited in-house support from our sports scientists. And so we have 3 sports scientists all across the country. They basically just take calls all day. They're one of the smartest people I've ever met. And all they do is just say, okay, if you give me access to your data, let's go through your data and let's see where one person versus another person, or one person against a group, why they're trending in a certain direction. Or let's talk about what impulse actually means. I know what peak force is, but what's impulse? And they'll just kind of go through in a really nice and easy way, provide analogies along the way of how you can manipulate or change impulse to get maybe the most out of that person. But really what we do exceptionally well is we try to find as many resources to help you be a better clinician, whether that's using our systems, or we've even had competitors who just didn't have that kind of resource when they bought the other thing, and saying, look, why don't you at least book a call with us and we'll get you started, and then, kind of go from there.
Excellent. Well, thanks, Anth. I think we're up against it with time here, buddy. I got to go see some patients, unfortunately. But Daniel, you have any last questions for?
No. Other than where, how can we find VALD, and how can we get a hold of you?
Yeah, so VALDperformance.com is going to give you just about every lick of information that you might need from our systems. If you want to ask me any particular question, feel free to reach out. I'm on Instagram, Twitter. I think my Twitter handle is Pillars of PT. Instagram, nice. I am, I think, Dr. Anthony Sinacore. And then, if you want to email me, you can email me easily at a.sinacore@vald.com. But really just feel free to reach out, ask a million questions. I love this. And really what I really enjoy, and why I might have moved to VALD from clinical practice, is I feel like I'm helping clinicians on a deeper level really understand some of these applied sports science sides, and seeing how we can really change your community and your patients' lives. So would happy to connect with anybody, but Daniel, Matt, I really appreciate you bringing me on today.
Yeah. Awesome, man. Thanks for coming on the show again. And we might ask you to fill in if I can't make it or Daniel can't make it. So
Always happy
Awesome.
to.
all right, guys, that's it from this episode. We'll catch everyone next week. Thanks, guys.